do you think our dominion is limited to Earth? Is it ungodly if we invest in colonizing Mars? The rest is just sin. Then I've seen the others who are like, no, dude, everything, I'm going to be a transhumanist and I'm going to, I'm going to upload myself. Like, wait, is that the only two the only two options is those
Yeah.
two? Oh, I read Revelation 2 and I don't see anything about the United States living through
Yeah.
a AI invasion or anything. It has to do with David's mighty men. Could these men be good standing members of my church?
May God bless and keep the czar very, very far away from us.
That's awesome. Hey, welcome back to another episode of Parker's Pensées. I'm your host, Parker Sedekase, and this is a podcast where we explore all the deepest ideas in philosophy, theology, nature, and life. I love thinking about cool stuff, so come think with me. Today's episode is a very, very special one. I have with me another returning guest, CR Wiley, and the last time we talked about his book, In the House of Tom Bombadil.
Singing is sustained, talking. So I'm not sure that the idea that, the word and logos, debar, and so forth, and music are necessarily incompatible.
It's a shorter book, but it's like just packed with a lot of good gnomic statements and wisdom. And one episode was not enough, so I have him back on. We're going to be talking about wisdom in general, wisdom in God, wisdom in philosophy. What is wisdom? How do we find it? Where can a young man get it? So I'm really excited to learn from him myself and to pass that on to you guys. So make sure you watch to the end so you can be an expert in finding wisdom and gaining it for yourself and for your children's children. Before we jump in, I want to thank everyone who's making this podcast happen over on Patreon and YouTube members. If you guys like this show, if you want to see me continue bringing guests on to bring wisdom to you, please consider becoming a Patreon patron or a YouTube member. That's the best way to support the show. You can find the links in the description wherever you're getting this podcast at. If you're on YouTube, just there's a join button. Everywhere else, look for that Patreon button. There's different perks and different levels of support, so please check that out and support your boy. That's enough commodification. Let's jump in with Chris Wiley and let's get into some wisdom stuff. Chris, thanks so much for coming back on the podcast, man.
Yeah, glad to do it, Parker. Good to be with you again.
Yeah. Dude, so I wanted to talk to you about wisdom because you've been a contractor, you've been a philosophy professor, a pastor, you played a lot of different roles, and you still have you're still jovial. You're not cynical, you're not burned out or anything. You seem like a wise dude. So I hope that's not embarrassing to put you on the spot like that.
No, I'm glad I come across that way anyway.
And you got the wisdom beard, man. It's beautiful.
Thank you.
Yeah. Can you, for the audience who is unfamiliar with you or hasn't listened to our last podcast episode, can you give us a characterization? Like who is CR Wiley?
Yeah, well, I as you noted, I'm a pastor. I serve a church here in the Pacific Northwest. I've been in this area about 2.5 years. Before that, I lived in New England for about 30 plus years and served churches there. I spent time in Boston. I was involved in urban ministry for about a decade, and got a background in the visual arts. I draw stuff and paint stuff, but I also have, as you noted, some background with teaching philosophy. I taught philosophy for a decade at the undergraduate level, so college students. And then I've been, as you noted, a contractor, and I've been a real estate investor. So I've owned commercial real estate since the early 90s. And I've got 3 grown kids, and I've got 5 grandchildren, and got a great wife. We've been married, man, how long is it now? It's going on 38 years. So anyway, yeah, things are great. So I still have a home back in New England, and so I kind of split time between my place here in the state of Washington. I live right outside of Portland. I'm on the Washington side of the Columbia River.
Oh, nice. Okay.
And my place back in Connecticut.
The two extremes, man. You ever spend any time in the Midwest at all, or no?
When I'm invited.
That's good. We got to get you out here.
Yeah, well, I did my first graduate program in Kansas City, so I spent time there. And then as a kid, I spent a good part of my childhood in St. Louis. My father was on faculty at Washington U there.
Okay. Oh yeah, you'd mentioned last time that your father was an academic. What did he teach there?
He was in chemical engineering. He was very junior faculty. He had he left the academy before he got very far along in his career there, but that's what I remember from when I was a kid.
Wow. Yeah, that's really cool. Something that's fascinating. I'm sorry for the whiplash for the audience, but this is maybe this is like a psychology session for me or a wisdom session for me to glean from you. You had mentioned that you draw and you do some art there, and I think you said you got into that as a kid um, because you wanted to draw comic books. Is that right?
Yeah, yeah, I was a big comic book fan. My extended family, my father's and my mother, they're into the arts, so I was introduced to the arts as a kid, and I showed some promise, and so I think I was like 7 years old when I was first enrolled in art school, and but it was always something I was uh, preoccupied with, and yeah, I wanted to be a comic book artist. That was my big dream. I think just about any kid, any guy, anyway, back in the day. This would be the late '60s, '70s. That's if they had an interest in art, that was the place they wanted to go.
Mm, okay. See, for me, that's so fascinating because if kids were into comic books, you'd make fun of them when I was growing up. And meanwhile, all of us were watching Batman the animated
Oh
series or
yeah, yeah.
Superman. We'd watch the cartoons, but if you were into comic books, you're like, "Dude, what's wrong with you? What's going on
That's
here? Why
right.
don't you watch Dragon Ball Z?" Yeah.
Right. Well, it's a little different when you can draw them. Everybody kind of likes you then again.
Oh,
So,
yeah. That's a good point.
yeah.
Did you have a favorite? Were you a Superman guy or who were you into?
No, I was actually wasn't too much into the Marvel or the DC
Hmm,
worlds. I was more interested in kind of stuff that was coming out of Europe. But in terms of if you had me, if you pinned me to the ground and said you got to like somebody that's popular, I guess maybe Silver Surfer,
mm,
kind of even stuff that's just a little offbeat in like
yeah.
the Marvel and DC world, Green Lantern, that kind of stuff.
Totally, man. I was the same way. Yeah, yeah. And it was my dad feeding me stuff, but yeah, Silver Surfer we would get just because of Thanos, really, when I was a kid. But yeah, that's awesome. So I, th- what counts as being masculine and like masculine wisdom seems to change, and I'm not sure if it really changes or if there's like a set of parameters that what there's still a natural order and you can be over here or over there, but drawing today or at least when I grew up, it wasn't like a masculine characteristic, and yet it's still like creating order out of chaos, and like I think we were impoverished in missing that. But you seem like someone who's embodying a fuller spectrum. So can you help us? Like, where does drawing fit? What's the deal? How do you think of it? Yeah.
Yeah, well, when you think about King David, here's a guy who could kill you or sing to you.
Yes. Yes.
So that kind of the warrior poet kind of
Yeah.
thing. And I think there's always been something of a connection, at least prior to the modern era, between the arts and masculine occupations. You think of
Mm.
Homer. Um, he goes on and on about the wonder of Achilles' armor. you
Mm.
know, uh, describing it and praising it and things like that. You see the same thing with like Aeneid, but I guess and I do think you see it even today in some places that perhaps people don't think to look. So I think the hip hop scene is
Mm.
kind of a revival of classical masculinity and in a certain sense. So if you
Mm.
think about, if you were to take Achilles or Homer and put him into our world, um, that would be a place where he'd feel very much at home. If you
Yeah.
get my drift.
Yeah.
So now maybe I've been told that the hip hop scene has changed a bit. And maybe I'm thinking about what was the case maybe even 15, 20 years ago.
Hmm.
But it was very much a kind of virile, braggadocious kind of scene.
Yeah.
I kind of liken. So when I think about, say, Greek heroes, and then I think about Roman, sort of the Roman ideal. I was a Red Sox fan back in the day when the Red Sox, finally won the World Series,
Yeah.
back in 2004. And the two people on the team that I think represented the Greek heroic ideal and the Roman heroic, or the Roman heroic ideal were David Ortiz. He was the Greek, you know, and then Jason Varitek was the Roman. So with Ortiz, he'd hit a home run and admire his home run, flip his bat, take the slow trot around the bases, just reveling in the glory of the moment.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's the Greek Homeric ideal. And then so there's an aesthetic to that. There's the flair. There's something about there's the bling. There's
Mhm.
all of that. And then the Roman ideal was more this sort of, I think, the stripped down, I do my duty, I'm almost embarrassed to be praised kind
Yes.
of thing. And that was Jason Varitek. He'd hit a home run, put his head down, run around the bases as fast as he could so as not to make the pitcher feel too bad.
Yeah. Yeah.
That kind of thing. But
Yeah.
I just did my duty. I'm not here for the praise. I hit a home run because my team needed it. And
Mm.
that kind of thing.
Man. Okay, so you're really putting your finger on something that I've been noticing a lot in the wrestling community. I grew up
Okay.
that's my people. I grew up American folk style wrestling since first grade. Those are the people I understand. My heroes were always my wrestling coaches, and that's what a man looked like to me. And the ideal was I didn't have this terminology till you, but it was a Roman heroic ideal.
Hmm.
Look, man, you shake hands, you don't boast, you're not doing backflips after you win. What are you doing?
That's
No,
right.
you don't flex,
Right.
let it show,
Right,
in your
right.
muscles while you're doing it, but you don't flex afterwards. And it's changing with this new, especially with Gen Z. They're flexing, they're taking down their tops and flexing and stuff. And a lot of us are like, "What are you doing?" And the rest, other people are like, let them do their thing. That's what they're into. And it's the Greek ideal, and it's been a big shift. And a
Yeah.
lot of us are just experiencing it and trying to figure out what's going on.
Yeah, it seems like maybe MMA has had some
Yeah.
some influence on just even traditional wrestling.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, sometimes people will say, "Well, that's kind of a feat or effeminate." Yeah, I guess so, but I mean, I think, there's always been, sort of a temptation with, men whose virility, uh, wins praise to enjoy the praise, and
Mhm.
to sort of adorn themselves in ways that seem to correspond, so they want that bling, they want the big flowing robe,
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
cape or whatever, that
yeah,
kind of thing. And so yeah, I mean, it's maybe a bit peacockish, but remember the peacock is male.
yeah, that's right.
The good, when you think about it in nature, you think about the big lion with the mane, it's the male,
Mhm.
and the silverback gorilla pounding his chest, that kind of. So I do think there is a kind of place for display. Now, how Christians should think about this, I think, is a great matter to consider. I personally, uh, I'm much more comfortable with the Roman ideal.
Yeah,
I think I do my duty. I do care about what you think about me, but I want it to be uh, a kind of regard that I served the interest of our community, our group, our family, that kind of thing. I wasn't trying to show off. I
yeah,
was just trying to be of use to the people around me.
yeah, yeah. I've seen one of my friends. I won't mention his name, but one of my friends, one of my best friends and teammates in college. He had like I called it stupid humility or dumb humility because when you would praise him, he was a jacked dude, and it wasn't the most skilled on our team, but sometimes he would just wreck somebody. We'd be like, "Dude, that was a great job." He'd be like, "It wasn't that good, and I shouldn't have." It's like, "No, dude, just accept it.
That's right.
Just accept it. Like that's part
Right.
of it too." And
Yeah.
see, I think you can
Yeah.
go, the wrong way on the Roman side too, right?
Oh, yeah, yeah, I think that there's even a question as to what's going on with that, are you trying to fish for more praise? Now, probably in the case of your friend, it wasn't the case,
No,
but I do think that there is kind of a goofy humility. I think sometimes you just like, if you know you're the best in the room, just in your praise, say, "Thanks, I
yeah,
appreciate that. I'm glad you, appreciate my work."
yeah, yeah,
That kind of thing. You don't need to rub it in anybody's face, but you don't need to, like, pretend you're not either.
yeah, yeah. No, I think that's true. There's also something I've been working on is thinking about like the fittingness of the situation. So
Mhm.
having like I think it's dumb to have a general rule like men don't cry. It's like,
Yeah,
well,
yeah,
if your mom dies, you should cry. What are you talking about?
right,
Like if
right.
you had a good relationship with your mom and she died, why aren't you crying? That's
Yeah,
inappropriate.
right,
But
right.
if you're crying out of stress when your whole family needs you, to
Yeah.
not be crying, that's inappropriate, right? It's like there's a fittingness, I would say.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that's exactly right. And sometimes this sort of thing, this sort of temptation to, well, this moves in two directions. So yeah, I think there's a time for everything. You see that in Ecclesiastes.
Hmm.
And I think, the men of Issachar were the men who knew what time it was.
Hmm.
It's time for this, it's time for that. The fittingness thing, very Aristotelian. Um, I also think that maybe there are impulses that we have at a given time to behave in a certain way, and it's not appropriate. And then that's the moment we have to like exercise some self-control.
Mm.
So you give you an example. Every once in a while, maybe every, I don't know, 2 or 3 months, um, when I'm preaching, there's something that happens and I lose my train of thought. I kind of feel like, oh man, I blew that opportunity. And I'm like 2/3 of the way and I just feel like sitting down and saying, that's it, everybody go home.
Yeah.
you know, it's not the thing to do, and, and there's also kind of an interesting irony to it. So you get to a certain point in your work where people give you more credit than you do deserve. And
Yes.
so you you flubbed up, but they're assuming the best.
Hmm.
Oh, look at that. I don't know what he's doing. I don't know if I understand. You understand perfectly. I just blew
Yeah, yeah,
it. But they're questioning themselves because of maybe your track record or something like that.
yeah.
So at that moment, the old statement, never complain, never explain, and never ever apologize actually is an appropriate thing. You
Mm.
don't call attention to your mistakes sometimes. You just sort
Mm.
of like, well, maybe I can just kind of muffle through this and they'll think they won't think worse of me.
That's good. Yeah. That's so good. I preached my first sermon this year, my first three actually, wild at different places. And the first one, I totally lost my train of thought, and I genuinely lost it. And I made a joke that wasn't in my notes, so it just blew everything up. And it was a good joke; it was worth it. But and then I go, hey, I straight up lost my train of thought. My pastor called out from the crowd, and he just gave me a reminder, and I was back on track. And
Yeah,
one of my friends later was like, "That was a great rhetorical, device because it made us all, make you're more relatable."
yeah, yeah,
And I wanted to say that, and I was like, "No, I straight up lost my train of thought. It wasn't. No, I wasn't manipulating anybody. I just didn't know."
right,
So
right.
that was
Well,
good
after
times.
40 years of doing it, it still happens to me.
Okay, that's good to know. That's good to know and bad to know. Yeah, that's like that to look forward to. Um, Chris, you got this new book that you've been working on, and I've seen rumors of it here and there. And so far, the working title, I believe, is "How to Defeat Totalitarianism 2.0 in Your Spare Time." And I don't know if that'll be the final or not, but the spare time thing is gold. That's got to
Yeah,
stay in there. And
yeah,
can you tell us a little bit about the book and what we mean by totalitarianism?
yeah. Well, totalitarianism, what characterizes it is its ambition. Um, we can look at the course of human history, and we've got tyrants all over the place, and people who were trying to take advantage of, their authority, authoritarians, and stuff like that. What makes totalitarianism a contemporary phenomenon is its uh, hubris, its belief, or the sort of the belief that's at work underneath the surface, that a total control of a population is possible, meaning even down to your thoughts.
Mm.
And this isn't pursued, for the sake of the ego of the dictator, although that obviously is in play in many cases. But this is something where an ideology which has a dream for a better world uh, justifies its ambit in terms of its approach and its ambition to control everything in light of that. So,
Mm.
you know, the stuff that's kind of bubbling to the surface now with like the World Economic Forum and so forth, things related to food and global warming and or global climate change or whatever the latest term is.
Yeah.
Um, these are the things that are used to justify the measures.
Hmm.
We have to control everything. That's why we need a smarter planet. That's why we need, what a smarter planet means is more responsive to human desires and control. That's what
Mm.
smarter planet means. I don't know if you're familiar with the
I'm
term,
not.
but
I'm not familiar with the term yet.
Yeah, it was used as a kind of advertising shtick by IBM maybe 5 years ago, something like that. Time for
Okay.
a smarter planet, Internet of Things, all that kind of stuff.
Okay. Okay.
What we're getting to is a place where we can control, or at least we think we can control all the conditions and variables, and engineer the world that we think is best.
Mm.
Um, and there are things that people who are calling for this can point to justify the project, but that's basically it. It's utopian in character, uh, and the utopia is kind of the expression of a ideological, sort of frame of mind or outlook. But that's what I'm getting at. So 2.0 is, I think that the methods are much more subtle and effective than they were in the early 20th century. So when we think about the totalitarianisms of communism or fascism in the 1930s, that's just, we can look at it and say, well, that's so crude. The optics are really bad. No one would ever try that again. Well, you're right. No one will ever try to do it that way again. But
Mhm.
I think that the people who, again, think that they're helping to bring into being a better world are aware of that, and they're not going to do it that way. They're not going to pursue that kind of program, or
Mm.
that kind of, with that kind of brutal, ham-fisted approach. It's going to be a much more subtle. It's going to consist of nudges and surveillance and that kind of stuff. That's why it's 2.0.
Okay. That's terrifying. Um, I wonder, is there a political philosophy that isn't aimed at totalitarianism?
Yeah, that's a great uh, rhetorical question, and different people come up with different thoughts. I mean,
Yeah.
if we look at classical liberalism, my friend Patrick Deneen would say we baked it in from the start. In
Mm.
other words, we go back to John Locke and kind of look at that kind of, so it kind of lends itself to this over time, even if that wasn't necessarily your objective.
Right.
Um, I think uh, in terms of political philosophies, people might not even think of this as a political philosophy, but I do think that paleoconservatism and its dependence on sort of conventions and tradition and uh, wisdom handed down through time,
Mhm.
uh, and it's just allergy to it's allergic to ideology, by definition. Now, what that does is some people are just frustrated with it because it seems to be too, I don't know, too cobbled together.
Okay.
Yeah, so you end up with sort of like a Rube Goldberg machine kind of look to, like,
Yeah, that's a good
yeah,
way to put it.
it's not as clean and efficient as libertarianism,
Yeah.
or as powerful as communism, or any of that kind of stuff. It's all kind of like, you know, scissors and paste and rubber bands.
Yeah.
That kind of stuff. And you say, well, it works.
And that's the idea, right? It's like, well, this set of scissors worked, and maybe you have this clean, brand new one that's all shiny, but this is the one that works. So let's keep it and slow your roll, and this is why it's cobbled together this way because our forebears, used these things.
Yeah, and people are comfortable with it, and are know how to use it. Aren't And we don't have to rely on the experts. That's another thing. I think ideologies are very appealing to the managerial class,
Mm,
and I think the managerial class is kind of a necessary evil. I mean, you're always going to need managers. We've had managers forever. The big difference, like, with regard to the moment that we live in, is that, again, their ambition.
yeah,
So you
yeah,
think about, say, the great public works of antiquity. Yeah, there was a lot of slave labor, and there were people who were overseeing all of that with whips and stuff.
yeah,
You'd say those were managers.
yeah,
They were taking the instructions that they had been given and enforcing them. And today we have there's just far more managers, and everything is much more managed everywhere.
yeah.
It's an overmanaged world. So, like, I compare the difference between my childhood and the childhood of children today in many cases. Um, there's just not any open space anymore. Everything is managed.
Yeah.
So like when I was a kid, I just grab my bat and ball and glove and hop on my bike and run down to the nearest baseball field, and there would always be a bunch of guys hanging out, and we'd have pickup ball and the basketball court or whatever. And it's still that, I suppose, in some places, but it just seems like every opportunity that we have to create a system that is managed and controlled, we do it.
Yeah. I I had that transition in my own life from being able to move freely as a kid to now it's a really big deal that we're out and about and our parents are mad. And it happened over the course of a summer or 2. I
Hmm.
remember, like, one my buddy's mom freaked out on us and was like, "What are you doing? You're supposed to tell us where you're going and all this stuff." I'm like, "We've never done this our whole lives. What are you
Yeah.
talking about?" But once
Right.
we got cell phones,
Yeah.
if
Yeah.
our
Yeah.
cell phone was dead, then they freak out and thought that someone murdered us. And so
Yeah.
that was a
Yeah.
big transition for us, because they could get in touch with us. Now they
Yeah.
felt like they had to get in touch with us.
Yeah, I enjoyed the neglect of the kind of the mid '60s, early '70s. I mean, the thing about the me generation is they really were so into themselves they weren't even thinking about their kids, and they
Mm,
had an upside and a downside. And I think some of the helicopter parenting is kind of a reaction to that, to that
yeah,
latchkey phenomenon.
yeah,
But there was just a tremendous amount of latitude a lot of kids had just because their parents were just so into themselves.
yeah.
They were almost annoyed that they were parents.
That's sad.
I
When
remember it vividly.
yeah, wow. When you think of the managerial class, like it's very, very obvious in academia, and you're like, "Holy cow, how many administrators do you have? Are you serious?"
Crazy, it's
Um,
crazy.
when I think about kids and being able to play freely, I'm trying to think of where I got this from, but in Lewis, or maybe it's a through line in Lewis, he talks about good getting better and evil getting worse, and I wonder if you agree with that statement and see, like, a necessity, like, are there more kidnappings of kids nowadays and they need to have more managers, and it's just like an unhappy, correlation, that we do need to be more careful around kids, or is it the helicopter parent? Any thoughts on that kinda stuff?
Yeah, I do. I think it's probably a combination of a couple things. One is just people just didn't think about it much,
Ah,
in the past, and
yeah.
there was a level of comfort that my neighborhood was, generally a good neighborhood. We didn't hear about bad things happening very much. People weren't connected 24/7 to the news cycle and stuff.
Mm,
And I
yeah.
think that's part of it. But I also do think that there is a kind of trajectory that things uh, follow. So we live in a society where uh, our political and intellectual elites don't really believe in God. They don't believe in providence. They don't believe. They think that faith is wishful thinking.
Yeah.
So um, when you lose confidence that there's actually someone running things, then you think, well, then I need to do it.
Yeah.
This is probably before your time, but I remember when Reagan was shot back in the early '80s. Everybody was sort of wondering what's going on, and there was a press uh, it's sort of like a public what's with press meeting of the press, and the announcement about how he was doing and stuff like that. And Al Haig, who had been a general in the I think the army, they asked him who's in charge, and he just kind of like, I'm in charge. And people kind of checked in and said, well, actually, no, Al's not in charge. They did sort of an analysis of what our constitutional order is, and they discovered that Al wasn't anywhere near being in charge.
Wow.
But I do think that there is a tendency that we see, okay, we live in a meaningless machine, and somebody's got to take charge of this thing, and
Mhm.
we now have tools that help us to at least believe we can do it, not just in terms of the natural order. If we do more of this and less of that, this will be what happens with regard to global warming or
Mhm.
whatever. But also people. So we don't really respect our fellow citizens as, um, b- you know, uh, moral agents made in the image of God. They're to be managed,
Mm.
and we'll do whatever we need to do to manage them. We know that they have these delusions of efficacy and freedom. So we can't be straight up about what we're up to.
Yeah.
We got to nudge them and encourage them and do different things to at least get get compliance. Manufacturing consent. There was that was a term that was used years ago. I think it was actually a term used by maybe Karl Popper or maybe Noam Chomsky,
Okay.
and it's really insightful. I mean, there is a tendency that elites have to say, "Well, this is what we want people to think and believe." That's what propaganda is all about, right?
Yeah. Yeah, man, there's so much. The ambition thing is really helpful, and seeing someone in charge. I think that when I asked the question about do all political philosophies lead towards totalitarianism, I think that's what I had in mind. That a lot of secular ones are like, hey, something needs to be done, and I guess we're the ones who are going to have to do it. And so, in my mind, like the smart planet, Internet of Things is like we're going to exert dominion over the planet in this way that we see fit, and a lot of us are like, yo, that's not the vision that I see.
Yeah, yeah,
But then there's a like complete opposite of the like green movement, like the radical green movement, who are like, we need to eradicate people, and that's how we care for the planet. It's like, but both of you guys are like, this is really bad.
that's
you're,
right.
you're on both extremes, and you don't see that you guys hate each other. So you coming at me being a Christian, but let me just
Yeah,
introduce you to one another here
yeah,
and let you
that's right.
guys fight it out.
That's right. That's right. Yeah, that maybe we're the only reason they can even work together. Is at least we got to keep
That's right.
those Christian people, out of power.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, I think that's right. I think so. The Baconian understanding of knowledge is power. I get into that in the Bombadil book.
Mhm.
This idea that there isn't any intelligence that is in the sort of the structure of things, but it's something that we bring to this kind of a Kantian notion that reason is something that um, we use to sort out a meaningless reality. Um, that just impressions and sense data and stuff. So all of that stuff, I think it characterizes the modern, this moment that we find ourselves in. And whether or not we'll come out on the other side of that is, wiser. It's something I hope for.
Yeah.
I don't think I'm going to live to see it. But yeah, that is the situation that we find ourselves in. And so, how do we work in these conditions? So that's the nature of the book that I'm working on. Is first half is an analysis of this outlook. Won't be anything new to anybody that's got a background in Western thought, but I'm trying to put it into some terms that people can relate to who aren't, philosophers, and also bring to the surface some of the biblical material that helps us to analyze it. So, for
Yeah.
example, when we think about the crisis that we face right now with language, with everything from pronouns to basically little communities that have their own languages that people outside those communities can't understand. Like when someone says it's a black thing you wouldn't understand, or it's a
Sure.
woman's thing you wouldn't. Basically, what we're saying is that there is no common reality that we share. That's or maybe another way to put it is just we're so trapped in our epistemic bubbles that um, we can't communicate with each other. And so power is the only thing that we should be thinking about, and different groups are going to fight to have you know greater a greater amount of power so that they can pursue their own interests or needs or whatever. No one ever thinks about that in terms of being at someone else's expense. That's why everybody needs to think of themselves as a victim.
Yeah.
I'm just
Yeah.
trying to, prevent you from doing harm to me. And when we think about, okay, what's the origin of that? Well, if we look at how Adam names the animals there in chapter 3 of Genesis, we're told that this is right, like straight out of children's Bible stuff. Like we got a picture of Adam and we got
Yeah.
a giraffe, right? And you say, "What are you going to call this one?" And and we're not given any insight into his method. It's
Mhm.
like, I guess, whatever arbitrarily Adam thinks up. That actually plays right into contemporary linguistic theory, that basically this is all just arbitrary and
Yeah,
it's
use determines meaning, right?
yeah, yeah, and historically conditioned and stuff like that.
Yeah.
And so it naming is an exercise of power, kind of raw power. So language is just a tool to control things,
Mm.
to identify things, so that you can come back and do stuff with it. But then we look at how Adam actually names his wife. So he's actually making some observations, and so there's some reason for the name. In other words, he's not imposing an arbitrary definite or an arbitrary name upon, that serves his own interests. He's saying, no, this is what characterizes this other person.
Mm.
She's like me, but she's not me. She's from me, but she's now looking back at me. So woman. Then Eve, because she's the mother of all the living. So this is really something that is intrinsic to her being. She
Yeah.
is a mother, or will be a mother. Contrast that with that Babel story. So in the Babel story, language is divorced from the world of the created world, and it's entirely been instrumentalized to build this civilization, and it breaks down.
Mm.
Now, the curse, whenever you see the curse referenced again in children's Bibles, basically the sort of the implicit message is, this is why the French talk so funny. Yeah, it's just kind of like, oh, this is an explanation for why we have all these different languages. I think it's a more subtle and incisive critique of this instrumentalist approach to language. Because if we think about language as strictly a tool that helps us to control the world, it isn't a big step or a leap to wonder, well, is it being used to control me?
Mhm.
And once that occurs, then you have the fracturing. You've got trust breaks down, language develops in ways that sort of serve the interest of particular parties,
Hmm.
and then you get conflict, and that's why you end up with the fracturing of this unified community. Yeah, we see the curse addressed at Pentecost with the work of the Spirit, but when I think about it in those terms, it makes tons of sense to me that the stuff that we're dealing with in our society right now reflects not just recent developments in linguistic theory or
Yeah.
recent postmodern takes on the nature of, or reality, or what we call reality, or radical subjectivity, or anything like that. I think it's
Yeah.
just this reflects kind of the challenge that we face when we have a world where people don't trust each other.
That's really insightful because if you were to reverse that and say, no, it is the impact of the instrumentalist view or the postmoderns, it's giving a little bit too much credit to them, right? It's like, well, how many people were reading Foucault, right? Like maybe a lot. He's the most cited author ever,
Right,
but
right.
now afterwards, right? But it's not. It's and I don't want to only go the sociological route and say, no, this the pieces were in place. No, it represents something deeper. And if you look at Babel as not a just so story that
Mm, mhm.
this is how the French, but I like them, and it's a lot deeper and richer. I really enjoy that. It makes me wonder about naming our children,
Yeah,
and, and I'm like, man, I don't know, because we don't know much about our kids when they're born. It's like, what are we going to call him? Like the strong one? I don't. Maybe what if he's weak, or do we
yeah,
name him that in order for him to live up to that? Like, have
yeah.
you thought about
Oh,
how
yeah,
we name things?
I think about it a lot. So, yeah, when you think about, say, names in particularly Genesis, it's almost like they're warnings to the community. Watch out for this guy. Like
So good.
Jacob.
Yeah. Right.
Watch out for this guy. And
Yeah.
why you did need to watch out for that guy.
Yeah.
And same with Esau. You need to watch out for that guy.
Hmm.
Or a name like Isaac, which means laughter, but it's actually kind of has an onomatopoeia. It sounds like in Hebrew, it sounds like laughing with the
Hmm.
name.
Hmm.
So, um, yeah, I think about that quite a bit. Today, yeah, you're right. I mean, we when we name children, we don't either we just do it because we like the sound of something, or we're trying to honor a person, or there's a hope where we're
Mm.
saying we hope this child lives up to this. And I think that's fine, but unless we want to wait for, until the kid's like 7 or 8, we can say, well, I know I got enough material to work with now.
Right, right.
But yeah, I do think that's worth thinking about. And now it's interesting that sometimes names do have an impact on a person.
Mhm.
Like if I named my child Banana Split, it'd probably mess with them.
Right, right.
Something like that. Um, so we do need to be concerned about how the name influences the child's prospects and
Yeah.
identity.
My dad has a story. I remember I was with him. We were in, Cub Foods when those were still around, and the the woman ringing us up, her name was Vendetta, and my dad, like, lost it. He's like, "What do you mean vendetta? Your parents named you that?" And
Right, right,
he's, he's Italian, but he's, like, American Italian, but he knows
right.
what a vendetta is, and
Sure, sure.
his father was from Sicily, so it's like, you don't that's
Right.
not something you take very lightly, man. Who did that to you? Yeah.
My guess is her parents just thought like the sound of it or something.
And she was African American, so it doesn't
Okay.
have the same kinda thing in
Right.
that culture, yeah.
Sure, sure.
Um, which is wild. When I think about, providence and wisdom, I think that the culture at large, like you said, is missing out on providence, and so they're probably missing out on the objective fact of reason, or living your life in light of the logos that is diffused throughout reality, or has planned, and living in light of that. When I think of Christians, and providence, I'm wondering, even in light of your book, how to defeat totalitarianism. I see a lot of Christians who are like, I read the end of the book and Jesus wins.
Yeah,
I'm
sure.
like, oh, so you just sit here? Like, what are you
Right,
talking? Like,
right,
how does he
right,
win? Does he not use his people? Like,
right,
and I see that an awful lot, where people are like, I'm not worried about AI because I know the end of the story. And I'm like, oh, I read Revelation 2, and I don't see anything about the United States living through
yeah,
a
yeah,
AI invasion or anything. Like,
right,
how do you know that we're going to be okay?
right, right. Yeah, I mean, you could say that if you're in a, would that be the source of comfort to somebody that's in a concentration camp? I
Right,
know who
right.
wouldn't it be great if we weren't in this concentration camp?
Yeah,
If
yeah,
we were someplace else. Yeah, I think that we need to take, the moment we find ourselves in seriously. And so my book is an attempt. So the second half of the book will be an attempt to draw from Christian teaching, uh, various sort of practices, activities, or things you can do, not just as individuals, but as churches or groups or whatever, to look after the interests of people, not just in the church, but even more broadly.
mm,
So, and that the, the problem that we face in our society today is we really don't have a way of talking about. I'm talking about secular world, the reality of human beings as images of God.
yeah,
So everything is physics and chemistry,
yeah,
and we're not really sure there's anybody home. Yeah. So
yeah.
I'm not even sure if I'm home if I read Daniel Dennett.
Mhm, mhm.
So with all that kind of stuff, as Christians, we have to acknowledge the real presence. So when we use the term real presence, at least in certain circles, that's got a sacramental character. We're talking about the nature of the Eucharist, or what goes on in baptism. And I think that's true. But I think we need to say, there's a real presence in heaven. There's a real presence in Parker. There's a real presence in my daughter. It's
Mm,
not just when this sort of mechanistic outlook. I know that there's the danger of the ghost in the machine and that kind of stuff, but I just don't know if we'll ever have the ability to um, truly get at the nature of what it means to be human, a human being, the essential character. I think we could describe facts like this is what Jesus does when he talks about the Spirit. You can see the effects, but you can't see it, where it's coming from,
yeah,
and that kind of thing. So there's a sense in which I have to, um, as a matter of, so if I acknowledge my own presence, um, then I'm going to give you the benefit of the doubt of the same thing.
Right.
You're really there, Parker.
Yeah.
You're not just in my head.
Right. Right.
You know?
Especially if I believe other things like that you're made in God's image, well, then why wouldn't you have a consciousness like me? Because I
Yeah,
have these kind of natural kinds set up because there's a kind originator who made us.
yeah. And I think what we're dealing with materialists is there's just so much question begging. With
Mm,
the positivist outlook, they there's a lack of self awareness on the part of many of those folks. They don't.
mm,
I don't know if they just have never thought about it, or they're just I don't want to think about it.
mm.
That what I think is foundational isn't as foundational as it's made out to be.
Yeah. I think that this perspective is a correction against the real presence perspective is a correction against that standpoint epistemology you were talking about,
Yeah.
where it's like, hey, look, if I'm black or I'm Hispanic, you can never know what it's like. And the materialist view, where you see every single day someone saying, and now they've discovered how to read your thoughts off your brain. And I'm like,
That's right.
well, doubt, let me push that doubt square. Um, but it's
Right.
it's 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 both. It's like, well, you'll never get inside here. You'll never be able to do that. And yet I can use language to help you see from my perspective, and
Mhm,
we can make an analogy between the two, and I can help you understand, even though
mhm,
you don't know qualitatively exactly what it's like to be me.
mhm.
Fine, but why should I have to have that in order to understand your perspective? We're
Yeah, and I
linguistic beings.
and I
Yeah.
think too, I mean, the wonder of being a human being, uh, the things that we share in common that make us human, those aren't occupying our attention much these days.
Mm,
That it seems to me that was what fascinated people in the past.
yeah. Would you
Isn't it
put the arts in there? Is that
Yeah, I think so. Isn't it marvelous that we have so many things in common? I mean, isn't that
oh, yeah.
unusual?
Yeah, the human experience, right?
Yeah,
Yeah.
right. No, I know we don't wanna paper over stuff, but at the
Mm,
same time, um, if we really are as alien to one another as sometimes maintained, then why is justice even a concern?
yeah.
Why not just wipe out, groups of people who are a problem?
Yeah. Man, that's good. It's tough, right? But that's really good. There's two questions that have been in the area of our conversation that I want to get at, and I have to just shoehorn them in because I can't think of a great way to do it. But you've talked about dominion before. I mean, the whole book in the House of Tom Bombadil. Again, I want to commend this to folks. You can find that link in the description. If you buy it from that link, you can support this podcast as well. But dominion, domicile, domus, like all the same root word. Do you think our dominion is limited to Earth,
Oh, wow.
or do you think that is it ungodly if we invest in colonizing Mars?
Yeah, there's 2 sides to this question for me anyway. One is, uh, there's a humility that I think is important to reconcile with dominion, and having dominion doesn't mean you just have carte blanche to do whatever you please,
Mhm.
and that's one of the things I get into in the Bombadil book. Um, on the other hand, I do have kind of a gee whiz sci-fi kinda side.
Yeah, yeah, me too.
And it's like, that's kinda cool, you know?
Yeah, yeah.
You know? So, like, I'm working on a review of, George Gilder's book, Men and Marriage, right now for Touchstone Magazine, and the thing that impresses me most about Gilder is he has that kind of boyish gee whiz quality, you know?
Hmm, mhm.
So here's a guy who was a Brahmin, sort of New England Brahmin, super high class. He's descended from Tiffany. Rockefeller was his godfather.
Whoa, okay.
Super connected. Went to Harvard. His father went to Harvard. That kind of thing.
Mhm.
And yet, he's got this sort of Ray Bradbury, Robert Heinlein kind of, boys' life sci-fi kind of gee whizness.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
everything he writes about, like, brings those 2 things together. So he's got this kind of, uh, affection for, sort of mom and mom's apple pie middle America kind of decency, and at the same time rocket ships and and
Yeah.
it's like all the stuff he wrote about, you know, Silicon Valley and all that kind of stuff. So I kind of I kind of relate to that. I've got this sort of uh, Norman Rockwell kind of outlook,
Yeah.
and Ray Bradbury Martian Chronicles
Yeah.
kind of thing.
Mhm.
So I don't know if that answers anything.
It's a good
It's
insight
kind of,
into you.
yeah,
Yeah.
it's just kind of the way I wish it works. I hope it works. I hope it works that we get to colonize planets.
Yeah. Yeah, I've noticed that too. I've noticed, like John MacArthur will be like, "No, it's this earth that's been given to man, and the rest is just sin." And then I've seen the others who are like, "No, dude, everything, I'm gonna be a transhumanist, and I'm gonna upload myself." Like, wait, is that the only two the only two options? Is those
Yeah,
two?
well, I think that's great. Yeah, because I do think that like Gilder, and I know some people have some critiques for Gilder for a range of reasons, and that's fine. I'm not trying to say that he's perfect or anything, but he does at least have a vision that's appealing
Mhm.
and wholesome.
Mm.
Like I don't look at the transhumanists and think wholesome.
Yeah.
I think monsters.
Yeah. Yeah.
And at the same time, when I think about, say, like a MacArthur-esque kind of crimped sort of, or even Wendell Berry. So if the choice was between Wendell Berry and transhumanism, Ray Kurzweil, I'll
Yeah.
take Wendell every day. Give me 40 acres and a mule.
Okay. Okay. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
But if there's a possibility that George Gilder is right and that we
Mhm.
can have pecan pie on Thanksgiving and clean cut kids and rocket ships,
Yeah,
that's what
man.
I'd like.
Yeah. That sounds really good. I ask, I'm in my head, I don't know, maybe this is too like millennial for you, but I have Sherlock Holmes Game of Shadows, the second one. So Moriarty and that classic 1890s clothes,
Yeah,
like
yeah,
peak in my mind, it's the peak
yeah, yeah.
fashion.
Are
I
you a
don't think we'll ever beat
steampunker?
it.
Are you a steampunk kind of guy?
Not quite steampunk. I do like it, but I think shoot, like cyberpunk maybe, but not
Yeah,
dystopia. If we
yeah,
can
yeah.
not have a dystopian. So it's
Right.
between Game of Shadows and Tron Legacy with the shiny, like I
Yeah,
have
yeah.
a, back here, but that like neon blue. If we can do those together, like that is something,
Well, you see,
but
that's really my project. Like when people will ask me about the household stuff that I've written, so I've got a trilogy of books on household economics and stuff like that,
Mhm.
and they immediately think I'm talking about Wendell Berry and
Yeah.
mules.
Yeah.
I'm like, no. I think air conditioning is great. I want to
Yeah.
keep it. I think I like muscle cars. I like a lot of stuff. I like antibiotics. I
Yeah.
like all that stuff. I want to keep it. I think that the challenge is for us to find a way to pull together some of the best things of these different sort of projects.
Mhm.
I think conservatism, best understood in the best way, is uh, receiving from our ancestors the riches that they have to give us.
Mm.
Doesn't mean we have to buy into their sins.
Yeah.
We can freely condemn the things that they did that were wrong.
Yeah.
At the same time, uh, when we look forward, we don't have to do all the crazy things that maybe we can.
Yeah, that's right. That's right.
you know,
Yeah. Yeah, I I speak with AI folks who are in AI proper, not the philosophy of mind folks. Those guys are all over the place. But the AI folks proper are like all in on transhumanism. And they're
yeah,
like, yeah, of course this is gonna happen. I'm not gonna, so long humanity, and hello, whatever we give birth to. And I'm like,
yeah,
that's like so terrifying that you're just
yeah,
so cool with that.
yeah, yeah. That is nuts. It's like the. Did you ever see uh, Fiddler on the Roof?
When I was young, yeah, not enough to
There's this marvelous
speak.
line where it's a Jewish community, in Russia, and the one of the rabbis is there, and his student comes up and says, "Is there a blessing for the czar?" And he says, "A blessing for the czar? May God bless and keep the czar very, very far away from us.
That's awesome.
That's kind of the way I think about those guys.
Yeah,
You know,
yeah,
just stay away from me.
yeah. That's so good. Okay, so that was the first one, was colonizing Mars. The second is, it has to do with David's mighty men, and I have a hard time thinking through how to think about them, because I grew up. These are my heroes. I wanted to be them. I wanted to be Benaiah. I wanted to go kill a tiger in the snow, in a pit. And
Right,
I
right.
love tigers, but I wanted to kill one just to say I'm Benaiah.
Yeah,
And in my head, I'm like, were these just men for a certain time? And like, could these men be good standing members of my church? Could they be elders at my church? Could David be? Because David wasn't allowed to build the temple. Solomon had
right,
to.
right, right.
And I'm like, man, I don't know. If I am I just because they're in the Bible doesn't mean I should look up to them, I guess. But these are men of war. They spilled blood, but also like they seem like they're noble,
Yeah.
good men. How do we think about them?
Well, I guess one of the things to consider is what it means to spill blood.
Mm,
It's a necessary act. We think about um, ritual uncleanness and the paradoxical character of blood and in all of that. I guess the life is in the blood. It's something that was noted in Scripture. I think in terms of what we admire in a man of war, I think what we admire are the virtues that we see that you need to possess if you're going to be successful.
mm,
Courage, of course, um, intelligence, if you're going to make certain that you're not deceived and defeated. So there are a range of things that we admire, and they can only be developed in the practice of those virtues. So I think I'm definitely Aristotelian enough to say that.
okay.
It's not just like just like magic kind of thing that you get like from the Matrix where you download
Yeah.
an ability to do something. You
Right.
actually have to do something.
Yeah.
So I'm of the conviction that those traditional martial virtues are praiseworthy, and I think I can justify that because our God is a God of war.
Yeah.
Um, like I remember when I first was a believer, there were a number of words that were puzzling to me, like uh, "take my yoke upon you." Yoke, I thought of like eggs. What's
Yeah.
that got
Yeah.
to do with anything? I didn't have any exposure to farming or husbandry. Another one was hosts. The Lord of Hosts. I just thought God was a great party giver. Just
Yeah. Good
I didn't
host.
realize that the host was like an army.
Hmm.
Came to understand that later. So this God fights. Um, so does that mean I'm into Genghis Khan? That's another one of those things. What kind of warrior are we talking about?
Yeah. Yeah.
I think um, there's something to be said for that. Maybe I'm just uh, insufficiently woke that I
That
still
could
I
be a good
still
thing.
admire the martial virtues.
Yeah. Yeah, I think of I forgot the title of the essay, but C.S. Lewis totally shines in his essays. I love his essays,
Hmm.
and it's like the necessity of chivalry or something about chivalry. And in there, he talks about these knights who are accustomed to seeing smashed faces, and yet then they go to the ball and they
Yeah,
can dance really well with the maidens.
yeah,
It's like,
yeah,
man, yeah, okay. I don't know that I'd like to see smashed faces, but, if God calls me
right.
to, because I'm not like I'm trying to be a man, I'm trying to be like a masculine dude. I'm trying to embody that. I grew a mustache, just as a stand-in, until I get there. But I'm not the baddest dude around, but I'm trying to be a a godly man who can handle himself and protect my family. And
Yeah, it's
I'm like,
great.
I don't know if I have to go smashing faces. I don't think that's part of it. But how do I embody the attributes of Christ in this modern world, which is like, if someone slaps your wife's butt and you punch them, you could go to jail. And it's like, is that what my wife needs? But I want to defend her honor, but your
Sure.
honor, the judge doesn't know about honor anymore. And so if
Yeah.
I use that defense, your honor, I was trying to defend her honor. And like, what's honor? What are you talking about?
Yeah, that's a great point. Yeah, honor. We don't live in an honor society, although there are certain subcultures where honor is still, uh, I think, least if not named, practiced or at
Yeah.
least acknowledged in some way. So I think about certain cultures in Europe. When you think about Sicily, you think about Italian culture, or many of the Latin or Romance, or you think about the Irish or the Scots. You
Mm.
know that in those places where you still see it. I've got a theory, by the way, why so many sort of Scots Irish guys marry Italian girls, and it's because they're both honor cultures, and so they kind of get each other. But the Italian girls know how to cook.
That's good. I'm Scottish, Italian, and Hispanic, so maybe there's
That's
some of that
right.
in there.
So yeah, well, all three of those are honor cultures, you
Yeah.
know. So
Yeah. Well, man, this has been good. You got to come back because I got a lot more questions. This has been really great. I don't know if the description in the beginning, matched it, but whatever, guys. You're still here if you're listening, and I appreciate it. Chris, man, thanks so much for all your wisdom. I'm gonna have to listen to this back over a couple times and chew on it. This has been really good.
well, it's been a fun talk, Parker. I've enjoyed it. Thanks for having me on.
Yeah. So if someone wants to hear more from you, and maybe this is the first time, you got the Theology Podcast. Can you promote that for them and tell people where
Sure.
else they might find some of your works?
Well, the podcast is a weekly podcast like yours. We're available on all the platforms and YouTube and stuff like that. We get about 10,000, I guess, views, downloads, whatever, between all the different platforms every week.
Yeah.
And the people who are on the show with me are Glenn Sunshine and Tom Price. He's an historian. Glenn's an historian, and Tom is a theologian who studied at Oxford. And we have guests, and but sometimes we just do a conversation on a theme, but among ourselves. And so that's a good place to follow or keep up with me. And then, you know, I write for different publications, um, like World Magazine, or I publish a number of things with different publishing houses. So, I kind of keep up with that kind of thing. And
Yeah.
I'm on social media.
Yeah. Chris, do you have a website that people can find those publications at?
Yeah, well, yep. I'm on the crwiley.com. I
Cool.
never go there, but it's amazing how many people do go there. I get the numbers every month, like 1,000 people. Like,
Yeah.
who are you people?
Yeah. Right. That's awesome. Yeah. I'll put a link in the description to that, folks, and to the Theology Podcast. Well, thanks again, man. This has been really great, and I hope it's just the second in a long line of you helping me think wisely and like a Christian man.
Well,
Uh,
I've enjoyed it, like I said, and you had some great thoughts too. And yeah, I'd be glad to come back.
awesome. All right, folks, that's gonna have to do it for now. This has been Parker's Pensées, and as always, all glory to God.